Hello, tributes, and welcome to part two of episode 12. Today we are going to be going over the 214th through 225th Hunger Games. This is about my third attempt recording it, so let's hope it doesn't crash. If it does, then you won't be seeing this intro because it crashed. But basically, I'd like to thank Christian Blanco and Lauren McCouch for making Tales of the Hunger Games and Panem Reborn, respectively. Without them, this series would not exist. I would also like to thank Andrew McLean for making a lot of the art featured in this video. Without him, these videos would just be boring walls of text, and that is boring. So, yeah. But anyways, let's get straight into it. Not gonna waste any more time on this intro. Let's just do it. After last year's games, the Capital viewership was already back to where it was after the 200th games, starting to even go higher. They hoped beyond hope for even more female victors. Luckily, this year's victor was also a female. This year, Districts 1 and 3 were picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 5 and 8 were picked to send in the extra male tributes. Here are the mentors for the 214th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in the savannah. The weather was clear skies, the main event was a heat wave, the games lasted for 2 days, and the notable months were hyenas. This year's victor was 14-year-old Proxima Rust from District 3. Before the games, head game maker Levias Click notably went insane, kidnapping multiple tributes and taking them to where he kept his mutts. He would then go on to test his mutts on these kidnapped tributes, killing every single one. After this, only 13 tributes remained. These 13 tributes were the girl from 2, all 3 tributes from 3, the girl from 4, the girl from 6, both tributes from 7, the girl from 8, the boy from 9, the boy from 11, and both tributes from 12. When the tributes were lifted into the arena, Proxima and many others reacted with surprise when they saw the lack of tributes still alive for the bloodbath. Many tributes didn't have any of their district partners kidnapped, and so they had no idea about how Levias had lost his mind. Meanwhile, the other tributes that lost their district partner knew about how Levias lost his mind, but didn't know to what extent. When the gong sounded, Proxima met up with her district partners, Jarvis, aged 18, and Marilyn, aged 15. The trio then ran into the cornucopia and grabbed survival supplies instead of weapons before running away from the cornucopia. When Proxima, Marilyn, and Jarvis got far enough away from the cornucopia, they listened in on the cannon sounding in the distance. Although there were only 13 tributes left when the tributes were brought up into the arena, tributes were still dying in the bloodbath. After the bloodbath, only 7 tributes remained. These tributes were Davina from 2, Proxima from 3, Marilyn from 3, Jarvis from 3, Kailani from 4, Hickory from 7, and Euphoria from 12. Once Proxima, Marilyn, and Jarvis realized this, Jarvis was the first of the trio to turn on the others. Jarvis punched Marilyn in the face before picking up a nearby rock and bashing Marilyn's face in with the rock. As Proxima watched this, she was utterly disgusted by this. After Marilyn's cannon sounded, Proxima ran at Jarvis and tackled him to the ground. Proxima then threw multiple punches at Jarvis's face until he went unconscious. Proxima then grabbed a nearby branch and stabbed it into Jarvis's brain, sounding his cannon. After Jarvis's cannon sounded, it was down to the top 5. The top 5 consisted of Davina from 2, Proxima from 3, Kailani from 4, Hickory from 7, and Euphoria from 12. At this point, Proxima began to get scared, as the only other remaining tributes besides her were careers. As the night went on, Proxima notably got even more fearful when the fallen tributes were shown at midnight. Proxima's mentors, Seneca and Alminio, didn't quite know what was running through Proxima's head at the time, but Proxima would mutter to herself about how she feared fighting the careers. After the fallen tributes were shown, 3 cannons went off in random intervals. These 3 cannons belonged to Davina, Hickory, and Euphoria after Kailani turned on the careers, killing them all as they wandered around looking for Proxima. As Proxima figured out that only one opponent remained, interim head game maker Kimberly Hightower came onto the intercoms in the arena, mentioning that a heat wave was going to come through the arena, and the only way to be safe from it was to go to the cornucopia. Immediately, both girls ran towards the cornucopia, ready to fight their final competitor. When Proxima arrived at the cornucopia, she dove behind a bush at the edge of the cornucopia area after seeing Kailani waiting for her. As the sun rose on the second day, Proxima finally dove out of her hiding spot, running at Kailani with her branch at the ready. This improvised weapon, carried by the girl from 3, made Kailani laugh, taking out her spear. In a moment of lapsed judgment, Kailani threw her spear at Proxima. As Kailani watched her only weapon fly straight past her intended target, she knew she was done for. As Proxima arrived next to Kailani, she stabbed Kailani in the stomach with her branch. Proxima then ripped the branch out of Kailani's stomach and apologized to her before plunging the branch into Kailani's heart, sounding her cannon. After the games, Proxima returned to District 3, where she was seen as a hero in the district for bringing another victory to the district and yet another female victor to the 3rd century. Proxima would become close friends with Arsenica and Alminio, bringing them with her to the bar on her 21st birthday. After her 23rd birthday, Proxima met the love of her life, Matrix Gulliver. Proxima and Matrix would end up getting married after they both turned 25. This pair would have 4 kids together, 2 girls and 2 boys. None of these kids would compete in future games, all being considered lucky by the other District 3 citizens. After last year's games, the capital was loving the female victors and viewership was at an all-time high. For the 215th Hunger Games, as this was the 28th quinquennial quell, President Belladonna Caliban made a live appearance on Capitol TV. After applause in Snow Square, President Caliban bowed and announced that in order to remind the districts of the importance of the victors, the number of tributes reaped for each district depends on the number of victors each district has. This year, District 1 had to send in 14 male tributes and 18 female tributes. District 2 had to send in 20 male tributes and 18 female tributes. District 3 had to send in 6 male tributes and 7 female tributes. District 4 had to send in 14 male tributes and 8 female tributes. District 5 had to send in 8 male tributes and 5 female tributes. District 6 had to send in 7 male tributes and 8 female tributes. District 7 had to send in 11 male tributes and 5 female tributes. District 8 had to send in 7 male tributes and 5 female tributes. District 9 had to send in 8 male tributes and 4 female tributes. District 10 had to send in 10 male tributes and 5 female tributes. District 11 had to send in 9 male tributes and 6 female tributes. District 12 had to send in 6 male tributes and 6 female tributes. District 14 had to send in 1 male and 1 female tribute. And District 15 had to send in 2 male and 2 female tributes. Here are all of the mentors for the 215th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a space station. The weather was not assigned because it's in space. The main event was an annoying alarm. The games lasted for 4 days, and the notable mutts were aliens. This year's victor was 13-year-old Lily Travis from District 9. Lily was one of 4 females reaped from her district this year, along with her older sister Lila, aged 16, her crush Riley, aged 14, and her best friend Ryan, aged 13. During training, it was decided by the 4 girls that they would ally in the arena. When the gong sounded, Lily sprinted into the cornucopia with Lila, Riley, and Ryan. The girls each grab either a sickle or a scythe before retreating from the cornucopia, with Lila stabbing Itana from 2 in the forehead with her scythe, sounding her cannon. When Lily, Lila, Riley, and Ryan felt like they got far enough away from the cornucopia, Lily sits down on the floor against the wall. After a couple minutes, Riley sat down next to Lily. Riley also seemed terrified, grabbing Lily's hand and holding it tight. The 2 girls would stay like this for a while, just holding each other's hands while Lila and Ryan watched on with smiles on their faces. Eventually, Lily lays her head on Riley's shoulder, still holding her hand. The pair would eventually fall asleep in this pose. As Lila and Ryan kept watch, 145 cannons sounded when the fallen were shown that night, leaving just 76 tributes, including Lila, Lily, Ryan, and Riley. As Lila and Ryan watched Lily and Riley sleep, Ryan admitted that she had always been jealous of Riley for gaining Lily's attention, admitting to Lila that she had a crush on Lily since they met 2 years before the games. Lila would sigh and playfully roll her eyes before stating that Lily did care about Ryan. Ryan sighed and stated that she knew Lily cared, she was just jealous that Riley got all the attention. As the pair got louder, with Ryan defending her opinion and Riley defending her sister, a scream and a cannon were heard nearby, causing Lila to cover Ryan's mouth with her hand. The pair would look back at Lily and Riley, seeing them begin to stir awake. As Lily and Riley woke up, Lila and Ryan pulled them to the side, behind the corner they were hiding behind. Just then, the bulky-built male tribute from 7 came into the room that the 9's camp was in. As Malcolm from 7 looked around for the 9's, the girls heard Hodgson from 9 yell to Malcolm, asking if he found those idiot girls from his district. Malcolm yelled back that he hadn't found the girls yet, which caused Hodgson to come into the girls' line of sight, beginning to raise his voice at Malcolm. As Lily, Lila, Riley, and Ryan watch Malcolm and Hodgson argue, Hodgson takes out his sickle, and in one swift movement, he sliced Malcolm's neck open with the sickle. As the girls saw this, Ryan gasped, and Lila covered her mouth, hoping Hodgson didn't hear Ryan. As Hodgson looked around, he saw Lila's long, curly brunette hair from around the corner. Hodgson grabbed Lila's hair and pulled her into the room, taking Ryan out with her as well. As Hodgson brought his sickle down into Lila and Ryan's heads, Lily and Riley quietly sobbed, holding each other close. Meanwhile, George from 9, Corasander from 9, Hemper from 9, and Guzman from 10 came into the cornucopia and congratulated Hodgson on killing the stupid girls from 9. The next night, 45 cannons sounded when the fallen were being shown in the sky, leaving just 31 tributes remaining. This did include Lily from 9, Riley from 9, Hodgson from 9, George from 9, Corasander from 9, Hemper from 9, and Guzman from 10, along with many others. As the sun rose on the 3rd day, Lily cried about the loss of Lila and Ryan. This crying woke up Riley, and she would hug Lily tight, letting her cry on her shoulder. After a little while, Lily pulled out of the hug and sniffled before kissing Riley. As the girls pulled away from the kiss, Juventa from 2, Megara from 2, and Mars from 2 sneak up on the pair. Juventa was the first to make a move, swinging her sword directly into Riley's neck, sounding her cannon. Lily would scream before being overcome with anger, picking up Lila's scythe and preparing to fight the trio of careers. This preparation surprised the career trio, but they took out their weapons to fight Lily as well. As the fight between the career trio and Lily went on, the capital would be surprised when Lily was able to overpower Mars, decapitating him with the scythe. This move would scare Juventa and Megara, causing them to run away. Lily would then pick up one of Ryan's sickles and throw it directly into Megara's back, sounding her cannon as Juventa successfully escaped. That night, 21 cannons sounded. This left just the top 10 by the fourth day. The top 10 consisted of Juventa from 2, Lily from 9, Hodgson from 9, George from 9, Corsander from 9, Hemper from 9, Guzman from 10, Noreen from 11, Marguerite from 11, and Rosin from 14. As the sun rose on the fourth day, an alarm began to sound. Just then, head game maker Kimberly Hightower came onto the intercoms in the arena, stating that the alarm would get increasingly louder until the tribute's ears exploded. The only way to survive this event is to get the one set of ear protectors that are now available at the cornucopia. Immediately, all surviving tributes rushed to the cornucopia, ready to fight for their lives and their ears. As Lily arrived at the cornucopia, she ducked behind a corner and watched as the boys arrived first. As the boys fought, Lily snuck closer and closer to the boys until she was almost right behind them. After Hodgson had killed the other boys, 3 cannons belonging to Noreen from 11, Marguerite from 11, and Rosin from 14 sounded in the distance as their ears had exploded, not being able to handle the noise anymore. As Hodgson turned towards the table where the ear protectors were, Lily tried to run to the table, getting grabbed by Hodgson just before she could make it. As Hodgson lifted Lily into the air, choking her out, Juventa ran in and tackled Hodgson to the floor, knocking Lily out of his hands and causing her to roll directly into the table with the ear protectors and knock them off of the table. As Hodgson and Juventa fought on the ground, fighting for the high ground, Lily scrambled trying to find the ear protectors. As she put her hand on the ear protectors, Hodgson's cannon sounded. Lily then quickly put the ear protectors into her ears and stood up to face Juventa. As Juventa noticed the ear protectors in Lily's ears, she gave up. Juventa stood right in front of Lily, staring directly at her. As Lily watched, Juventa's ears popped before Juventa's head popped like a grape, and Juventa's headless body collapsed to the ground, covering Lily's face in blood. After the games, Lily immediately joined the Victor Therapy group, after the things she had seen in the arena. After a year, Lily just turned 14, and she met a gorgeous girl through the Victor Therapy group. This Victor would be the victor of the next games, Elizabeth Fraser from District 14. Lily and Elizabeth would grow very close before eventually beginning to date after Lily turned 16. After turning 18, Lily married Elizabeth. The pair would adopt 6 kids together, 3 girls and 3 boys. The 3 boys would go on to compete in future games, being the last to get killed. Meanwhile, none of the girls would go on to compete in future games, living a happy life with their future wives. After last year's games, the capital was happy about the victories of the past few years, and they were excited to see what came next. This year, Districts 14 and 15 were picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 10 and 12 were picked to send in the extra male tributes. Here are all the mentors for the 216th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a eucalyptus forest. The weather was rain, the main event was a hurricane, the games lasted for 4 days, and there were no notable months. This year's victor was 17-year-old Elizabeth Fraser from District 14. Before the games, Elizabeth had formed an alliance with her boyfriend Lionel, aged 16, her best friend Mercia, aged 18, and the 15s, Baptiste, aged 15, Antoinette, aged 14, and Ariane, aged 18. When the gong sounded, Elizabeth ran into the cornucopia with Lionel and Ariane, while Mercia ran away to protect Baptiste and Antoinette. At the cornucopia, Elizabeth, Lionel, and Ariane grabbed weapons and supplies before retreating, only killing Alexa from 3 when she tried to take fishing bait from Lionel. When Elizabeth, Lionel, and Ariane found Mercia, Baptiste, and Antoinette, they immediately dealt out the supplies they had grabbed from the cornucopia. After the bloodbath, 9 cannons sounded in order to symbolize the end of the bloodbath. These 9 cannons belonged to Alexa from 3, the boy from 4, the girl from 7, both tributes from 8, both boys from 10, the girl from 11, and the extra boy from 12. As the day went on, more cannons went off as the careers found more tributes and killed them. Meanwhile, Elizabeth and her allies actually decided to follow the careers, staying many steps behind them. At one point during the night, Elizabeth had received 8 sponsor gifts at the same time. All the notes left inside commenting on Elizabeth's beauty and the tactics of her and her allies being the smartest the capital has seen from the 14s and 15s. As the night went on, Elizabeth received even more sponsor gifts, all commenting on her beauty. Meanwhile, the rest of Elizabeth's allies only received 1 or 2 sponsors each night. Elizabeth's allies would get quite jealous of Elizabeth's pure amount of sponsors, but they ultimately wouldn't complain because of the fact that Elizabeth let them use what came from her gifts when they needed it. This niceness made the capital want to sponsor Elizabeth even more. By the end of the second day, Elizabeth had received the most sponsors a tribute has ever received in a single games. Mercia, Antoinette, Ariane, Lionel, and Baptiste would grow increasingly jealous and angry that Elizabeth was receiving the most sponsors out of the entire alliance. On the dawn of the third day, Elizabeth's allies had enough of her receiving most of the sponsors. Lionel and Mercia attempted to distract Elizabeth so the 15s could kill her. As the 15s tried to sneak up on Elizabeth, though, Elizabeth had just opened another sponsor gift, warning Elizabeth about the plan her allies had made. As Elizabeth read the note, she immediately jumped up from where she was sitting against one of the trees and turned around to see the 15s. Elizabeth then picked up her nearby sword, ready to fight the 15s. As Elizabeth began fighting the 15s, Lionel and Mercia ran away, not wanting to fight Elizabeth. As the pair from 14 ran away, Elizabeth overpowered Ariane first, decapitating her with her sword. As Elizabeth turned to Antoinette and Baptiste to fight them, they heard Lionel and Mercia screaming after running into the careers they had been tailing the whole time and being killed. After hearing Lionel and Mercia's cannons, this caught Antoinette and Baptiste off guard, allowing Elizabeth to overpower Baptiste, stabbing him in the stomach. After killing Baptiste, Elizabeth turned to Antoinette. Antoinette would beg for her life, but Elizabeth would simply ask Antoinette if she would have given her the same option, to which Antoinette replied with a tearful no. This answer caused Elizabeth to bring her sword down onto Antoinette's head, killing her. On the dawn of the 4th day, it was already down to the top 10. The top 10 consisted of Amber from 1, Aurelius from 2, Delta from 4, Echo from 5, Liberty from 6, Hudson from 7, Jenny from 10, Faith from 12, Herb from 12, and Elizabeth from 14. As the top 10 realized they didn't have many other competitors left, the wind in the arena began to whip around quicker and it began to rain. Many tributes immediately recognized what was going on and quickly went to find shelter more inland, many running to the cornucopia, including Elizabeth. As Elizabeth ran, sponsor gifts fell behind her, being left behind for the now incoming wall of water. When Elizabeth got to the cornucopia, she realized she was the first to arrive there. She quickly climbed on top of the cornucopia as she watched the water coming in. As the water got closer, 7 cannons went off. These cannons belonged to Amber from 1, Aurelius from 2, Delta from 4, Hudson from 7, Jenny from 10, Faith from 12, and Herb from 12, all having been killed by the massive wall of water. Eventually, Echo and Liberty burst through the clearing of trees on opposite sides of the cornucopia from each other, both being followed by massive waves of water. As Echo and Liberty climbed towards the top of the cornucopia, Elizabeth prepared to fight. As soon as Echo's hand was placed on top of the cornucopia, Elizabeth stabbed her sword into Echo's hand, causing Echo to scream out in pain and almost immediately fall back into the water, drowning and sounding her cannon. Elizabeth then turned around and saw Liberty standing on the cornucopia right in front of her. Elizabeth prepared her sword yet again in order to fight Liberty. Liberty would take out her knives and prepare to fight as well. As Elizabeth fought Liberty, the capital was surprised when Liberty actually managed to defend herself against Elizabeth's sword with her knives. As the fight went on, Elizabeth actually started losing ground, being pushed back to the edge of the cornucopia roof. As Elizabeth was about to be pushed off of the roof, though, she quickly remembered something she had been sponsored earlier. Elizabeth quickly took out a vial of venom and threw it directly into Liberty's eyes. The glass of the vial then broke in Liberty's eyes, causing her to let out an agonizing scream. Elizabeth then picked Liberty up and tossed her down into the water, where she'd let the current deal with Liberty. After the games, Elizabeth was loved by many capital citizens, and many even recommended Elizabeth should get into the business of selling her body for profit. Elizabeth would deny this, instead of deciding to become a shopkeeper within the Flickerman Mall in the capital. Elizabeth would sell gaming supplies to aspiring streamers and attend the Victor Therapy group on the side in the capital until she met the love of her life, then 14-year-old Lily Travis, victor of the 215th Hunger Games. The pair would become one of the cutest couples in the entire capital, and many future couples would aspire to be like them. Even after their adopted sons die in the Hunger Games, Elizabeth and Lily would remain happy along with their 3 adopted daughters. This would later be revealed to be because it would have been what the boys would have wanted from them. After last year's games, the capital viewership was at an all-time high, being at almost 90,000 viewers. This year's victor would be one of the most loved victors of the 3rd century, having beat the odds this year. This year, Districts 1 and 3 were picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 2 and 5 were picked to send in the extra male tributes. Here are all the mentors for the 217th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a wonderland. The weather was light rain. The main event was a dance-off. The games lasted for 6 days, and the notable mutts were playful foxes. This year's victor was 12-year-old Mariana Diaz from District 10. Mariana was the youngest tribute this year, having just turned 12 the day of the reaping. The idea of her winning was a laughable matter. people thinking there was not a single chance that Mariana could win. Two things happened that cemented Mariana's placement in the pack. The first thing to occur was during training when she was not allowed into the Career Alliance, purely based on her age. The second thing to happen was during training assessments. Mariana surprisingly gained a training score of 9, surprising and even scaring a lot of the other tributes this year. When the gong sounded, Mariana ran into the cornucopia and grabbed a sword, ready to fight whoever came to her. After killing Rai from 9 with his spear, Fortunato from 1 turned to Mariana, along with Hades from 2 after he had killed Hector from 2 with his trident. Mariana then prepared her sword to defend herself, which made the two 18-year-old career boys laugh hysterically. Their laughing would be cut short when Mariana infamously decapitated both boys in a single swipe of her sword. As Mariana ran away from the cornucopia, many capital citizens immediately changed their bet on who would win to the underdog, Mariana Diaz. It was immediately evident this year that the outliers and younger tributes were the more dangerous of the tributes this year, most of the careers dying in the bloodbath. After the bloodbath, 11 cannons sounded, marking the end of the bloodbath. These cannons belonged to both girls from 1, Fortunato from 1, Hades from 2, Hector from 2, the boy from 4, both tributes from 7, Rai from 9, the boy from 10, and the boy from 12. By the second day, all the careers were dead, leaving just the young and the inexperienced. Mariana was the only tribute left that came from a career district, but of course she wasn't considered a career tribute this year due to her young age. Not much happens on Mariana's side of the arena between the second day and the sixth day, but by the dawn of the sixth day, it's down to the top 10. It was made evident to Mariana that she and Lacey from 8 were the only females left among the top 10. The capital also realized this, fearing another male victor. Both Lacey and Mariana decided to dedicate whatever time they had left to finding each other and allying together in order to possibly take down the boys. Lacey and Mariana were both the youngest tributes this year, both having turned 12 sometime in the recent months. When the pair found each other, the tension could surprisingly be cut with a knife, but eventually Lacey and Mariana agreed to ally with each other. As the day continued, many of the remaining boys went insane trying to find the other tributes, ending their own lives. This would go on until the top 5 is all that remained. The top 5 consisted of Linker from 3, Hawk from 5, Lacey from 8, Mariana from 10, and Lupin from 11. All of these remaining tributes were some of the youngest tributes in the arena this year. Linker, Hop, and Lupin were all 13, as opposed to Lacey and Mariana, who were 12. As the tributes made their way through the wonderlands they had gotten so used to, they kept their eyes over their shoulders, keeping a lookout for an arena event. Just then, head game maker Kimberly Hightower announced that once the tributes got to the cornucopia, a once-in-a-lifetime event will be held, in which the remaining tributes will have a dance-off. If any tributes attack each other during this event, their tracker detonates. If any tribute doesn't impress Kimberly and her crack team of judges, their tracker detonates. Kimberly then got off of the comms of the arena, letting the tributes continue making their way down to the cornucopia. As the tributes got to the cornucopia, they glared at each other. It was at this point that head game maker Kimberly Hightower got back onto the comms and simply said "begin" before getting off the comms. The Capitol thought this would be a free-for-all, but immediately two duos and a solo were formed for this dance-off. Lacey and Mariana teamed up, along with Linker and Hawk teaming up together as well. As the dancing began, it was immediately evident that the duos had some room for error, considering there was a solo who was gonna get the most scrutiny. As the dancing continued, Lupin knew he didn't have a chance. If he was going down, he was gonna take someone with him. In a quick moment, Lupin tackled Linker to the ground, causing Lupin's tracker to be detonated. This detonation right on top of Linker caused his arm to get blown off. As Linker screamed out in pain, Hawk stopped dancing. This caused both members of the pair to get their trackers detonated, leaving just Lacey and Mariana to vie for the crown. As Lacey and Mariana realized this, head game maker Kimberly Hightower got back onto the comms, simply stating, "Now fight." Mariana and Lacey looked at each other before preparing their weapons. Lacey then ran in with her sewing needle, starting to tear up. Meanwhile, Mariana smiled and closed her eyes, waiting for Lacey to stab her, but this wouldn't happen. When Mariana opened her eyes, she saw Lacey stood right in front of her, mentally unable to stab her. Lacey then dropped her sewing needle and nodded to Mariana. Mariana then hugged Lacey, admitting that Lacey did a good job making it as far as she did. This caused Lacey to reply with a small, half-hearted thank you. Mariana then took her sword and stabbed Lacey in the heart, sounding her cannon almost immediately. As Lacey's body fell to the floor, so did Mariana, crying over what she had done in the arena. After the games, Mariana immediately started attending the Victor Therapy group, growing to be close friends with Lily and Elizabeth, along with a few other future Victors. Meanwhile, her love life would end before it even began, her never falling for anyone in the capital or in her own district. She'd eventually come out as aromantic at the age of 17. She ended up staying single the rest of her life, although she did adopt a son who'd go on to compete in and win a future games. After last year's games, the Capitol was excited for the next games, as well as the Quell that was coming in 3 years. This year's victor was one of the only 2 male victors this decade. This victor also beat the odds, being one of the weakest tributes this year. This year, Districts 1 and 9 were picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 6 and 7 were picked to send in the extra male tributes. Here are the mentors for the 218th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a flooded field. The weather was a downpour of rain. The main event was a major thunderstorm. The games lasted for 7 days, and the notable mutts were alligators. This year's victor was 17-year-old Jeremiah Oram from District 8. Before the games, Jeremiah was the only victor in the history of the games to actively be joked right in front of his eyes by every single tribute and even his mentor and some peacekeepers. This joking would turn into genuine surprise and even some fear when Jeremiah manages to score a 7 during his training assessment. When the gong sounded, Jeremiah ran into the cornucopia and grabbed a set of knives and a backpack before fleeing the cornucopia. As Jeremiah ran, he bumped into Anaya from 3, who looked genuinely scared. Jeremiah then helped Anaya up, and the pair continued to run away from the cornucopia together. As the first day went on, Jeremiah and Anaya would talk about their lives back in their respective districts. Anaya talked about how the kids in her school always laughed at her due to her glasses. The laughing was something that both of these tributes could bond over, considering everyone always laughed at Jeremiah because of how weak he was. After the bloodbath was over, the capital was genuinely surprised that Anaiah and Jeremiah made it out, considering Jeremiah was the weakest tribute this year and Anaiah hadn't had any allies before Jeremiah had found her. As Jeremiah and Anaiah continued to talk, Jeremiah went into detail about how even his crush laughs at him for his weakness. Anaiah sighs and shakes her head, stating that maybe Jeremiah's crush isn't the right girl for him. This would cause Jeremiah to sigh and claim that he knew that, but he just couldn't let her go. Later that night, as the pair tried to sleep, it got cold. This caused Anaiah to get closer to Jeremiah, nuzzling into him for warmth. This caused Jeremiah to blush, putting his arm around Anaiah as the pair were finally able to fall asleep. At midnight, when the fallen tributes were shown in the sky, only 6 cannons sounded. These 6 cannons belonged to the boy from 1, the boy from 3, the girl from 4, the boy from 14, and both tributes from 15. Jeremiah and Anaiah woke up the next morning to a cannon sounding nearby. This cannon belonged to Hibisca from 11 after the careers found the 12-year-old and killed her. This death would be revealed to have been very slow and torturous. As Jeremiah and Anaiah got up to look around, another cannon sounded. This one belonged to Angel from 8 after the careers found her nearby to Hibisca and mercilessly slaughtered her. This death was once again slow and torturous. This style of killing would become the main killing style for the careers this year. Jeremiah and Anaiah looked between each other after hearing these cannons before hearing something else. As the pair looked into the sky to see what it was, they saw a sponsor gift falling from the sky for them. As the pair looked at what the sponsor gift had inside of it, they saw a hunting knife and a tin of medicine. Jeremiah and Anaiah would look between each other before deciding together that Anaiah should wield the knife. As the pair decided who should wield the knife, Ember from 1 snuck up behind Anaiah before stabbing her in the back. As Anaiah screamed out in pain, Jeremiah grabbed a nearby branch and wielded it as though it was a weapon, before being unable to reach his bag with his knives. As Anaiah fell to the ground, Ember turned her sights toward Jeremiah. Ember smirked and ran at Jeremiah, laughing maniacally as Anaiah screamed out in pain and fear for Jeremiah. Jeremiah ran in and swung his branch, but Ember skillfully ducked under the swing and stabbed Jeremiah in the stomach with her sword, before being stabbed in the back a grand total of 15 times by Anaiah, who had found the strength to stand. As Ember's cannon sounded and Jeremiah fell to the ground in pain and agony, Anaiah tried to give Jeremiah the medicine. Although Jeremiah declined and stated that Anaiah needed to medicate and win, Anaiah eventually held Jeremiah down and treated his wound with all the meds the pair had, leaving her wounds untreated. As the days went on, Anaiah got sicker and sicker due to an infection that had started to spread through her body from the untreated wound. Anaiah's condition saddened Jeremiah, almost causing him to cry on the 5th day. The final night Jeremiah saw Anaiah alive, she had told Jeremiah to take the first night watch, to which he agreed. At about midnight on the 6th night, a cannon sounded. Jeremiah immediately looked over to Anaiah, who had been laying there, peacefully sleeping. He then looked up into the sky to see the fallen of the day showing, bursting into tears when he saw Anaiah's portrait shown in the sky. By the dawn of the seventh day, it was already down to the top five. The top five consisted of Helena from 2, Marlon from 4, Junipero from 7, Jeremiah from 8, and Hux from 10. As Jeremiah woke up on the seventh day, he felt little rain droplets landing on him. As Jeremiah got more conscious, the rain got heavier. Eventually, Jeremiah shot up from the ground and ran, running in the general direction of the cornucopia. As Jeremiah ran to the cornucopia, he heard two cannons. These two cannons belonged to Helena and Hux after they didn't wake up from their sleep and drowned in the slowly rising water levels. As Jeremiah arrived at the cornucopia, he watched Junipero decapitate Marlon. At that point, Jeremiah noticed that his only remaining opponent was right in front of him. As Jeremiah was contemplating stepping out of his hiding spot, he noticed that Junipero was showing signs of poisoning. It was revealed that during the night, Junipero's water and food supply was poisoned by Helena during her watch. It was at that point that Jeremiah decided to wait it out. Jeremiah would stay hidden, waiting for the poison to take her life. As Junipero fell to the ground, Jeremiah stepped out of his hiding spot. As Junipero saw him, she begged Jeremiah to put her out of her misery. He would reluctantly do this, stabbing Junipero in the gut. It took a while for Junipero to die. This whole time, Jeremiah stayed with her. As Junipero was about to die, she let out a weak smile and thanked Jeremiah for staying with her. After her cannon sounded, Jeremiah bowed his head out of respect for Junipero. After the games, Jeremiah returned to District 8. After returning to District 8, Jeremiah tried to open up a training academy within the district. Due to the nature of the district and its production, the training academy was swiftly shut down. Instead, Jeremiah and other victors of the district would illegally train possible future tributes for the right price. After a little while, Jeremiah met a gorgeous girl through his illegal training in the district, being named Jacqueline Wells. Jacqueline and Jeremiah would end up becoming best friends, training together every year until she turned 18. When Jacqueline went without getting raped after her 18th birthday, Jacqueline and Jeremiah quickly got married immediately after her last raping. This pair would end up having 10 children together, 2 boys and 8 girls. None of these children would go on to compete in future games. After last year's games, the Capitol was hoping that Jeremiah's victory didn't mark the beginning of another decade of only males. Luckily for the Capitol, a female won the next 2 games. This year, Districts 1 and 15 were picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 1 and 14 were picked to send in the extra male tributes. Here are the mentors for the 219th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in Green Hills. The weather was clear skies. The main event was an earthquake. The games lasted for 6 days, and the notable nuts were sheeps. This year's victor was 14-year-old Cassie Walkhouse from District 10. Before the games, Cassie's potential was immediately evident when she sliced 15 mannequins in fast succession during training. When Cassie got a training score of 11, it was definitely a surprise to Mariana Diaz, victor of the 217th Hunger Games, and Mateo Gutierrez, victor of the 208th Hunger Games. When the gong sounded, Cassie ran into the cornucopia and grabbed a pickaxe, immediately turning on the careers by killing Moderna from 12 and Fabia from 12. Cassie then immediately turned to Lavinia from 2, who was nearby. As Cassie snuck up on Lavinia tackled Nina from 8 to the ground. This caused Cassie to snap, and she ran up behind Lavinia, decapitating her. Cassie then helped Nina up and instructed her to find Raymond from 8 and run away. to which Nina did immediately. Cassie then turned to Maple from 7 and Ray from 4. This pair had been the pair that Cassie grew the closest to during training, having seen what Cassie had done to Moderna, Fabio, and Lavinia scared Maple and Ray. As Cassie approached Maple and Ray, Maple took out her axe as Ray took out his trident, ready to fight. Cassie laughed as the pair took out their weapons, still making her approach. As Cassie finally got close to Maple and Ray, she swung her pickaxe over her shoulder. Cassie would smirk at the pair, being happy this pair was so fearful. She'd then walk even closer to Maple first. Cassie glared into Maple's eyes, a wicked smirk plastered on her face. She then swung the pickaxe straight into the side of Maple's neck, slicing her neck open before swinging the pickaxe into the side of Ray's head, killing them both immediately. Cassie would then run off to try and catch up with Nina and Raymond. By the time Cassie caught up with Nina and Raymond, the bloodbath was over. It was revealed that after Cassie ran away, there was a massacre of the remaining careers, leaving only Lorcan from 2 and Miguel from 10, who were able to kill Luz from 5 and Vital from 9 before fleeing, leaving the cornucopia for the outliers. Later that night, Cassie took first watch with Nina. The girls would use this time to talk to each other about life in their respective districts. Cassie talked with Nina about how life in a career district was slightly stressful, considering they had to worry about making it to training on time each day. In District 10, Cassie and her 13 siblings were forced every day of every year by their parents to attend training on time. If any siblings failed to arrive on time, all siblings would pay for it. Meanwhile, Nina talked about how stressful her life was. Nina had to use her hunting expertise to take care of her younger sister, her younger brothers, and her drunken father. She would occasionally get caught by peacekeepers sneaking out of the district to hunt. This would cause her to get whipped in the town square. After mentioning being whipped, Nina would show Cassie the wounds of the most recent whipping, having happened the day before the reapings. As the pair talked, 3 cannons could be heard in the distance. These cannons belonged to Twitch from 3, Ryzen from 3, and Miguel, after Miguel and Lorcan attacked the pair from 3 and the girl from 5, being able to take down the pair from 3 before Lorcan fled, leaving Miguel to be dealt with by the surprisingly strong girl from 5, Nebula, age 17. By the dawn of the 3rd day, it was already down to the top 10. The top 10 consisted of Lorcan from 2, Nebula from 5, Panama from 6, Montpellier from 6, Nina from 8, Raymond from 8, Scythe from 9, Cassie from 10, Leslie from 11, and Sabrina from 15. As the day continued, all remaining groups in the arena continued to talk with each other. As these conversations were happening, the capital was getting bored of the games, starting to tune out of the games. Many capital viewing parties stopped about halfway through the 5th day. Around midnight on the 5th night, leading into the 6th day, the ground began to shake. As the ground shook, shelters built by tributes collapsed, and trees around the outskirts of the arena collapsed as well. As Cassie noticed this, she alerted Nina and Raymond to the obvious earthquake. This caused Nina and Raymond to get up, and the entire trio started to run to the cornucopia. As the trio ran to the cornucopia, Raymond tripped over a nearby branch and fell to the ground. Nina tried to run back for him, but a tree collapsed right in front of her, causing Cassie to grab her and drag her away from Raymond. As Cassie dragged Nina away, Nina cried as Raymond's cannon sounded. As Cassie and Nina arrived at the cornucopia, they ducked under the cornucopia behind some boxes. Just then, Leslie and Sabrina jumped out from behind a different set of boxes, having seen Lorcan. It was at that point that Cassie and Nina realized they had made it to the top 5. The top 5 consisted of Lorcan from 2, Nina from 8, Cassie from 10, Leslie from 11, and Sabrina from 15. As Leslie and Sabrina fought Lorcan, Nina and Cassie watched from behind the boxes they had dived behind. Just then, Lorcan managed to decapitate Sabrina. Lorcan then broke into hysterical laughter before slicing one of Leslie's arms off with his sword. As Leslie screamed out in pain, Cassie and Nina jumped out from their hiding spots. Cassie then took out her pickaxe and swung it at Lorcan. Lorcan easily ducked under this attack before being hit in the back of the head by one of Nina's throwing knives, sounding his cannon. As Lorcan fell to the ground, Cassie and Nina looked over at Leslie. Leslie begged for the girls to finish her, to put her out of her misery. Cassie would step closer to Leslie and grab the back of her head, reluctantly plunging her pickaxe into Leslie's neck. Just then, Nina and Cassie realized they were the only tributes left. As they realized this, Nina ran in first, stabbing Cassie in the stomach with her knife. This caused Cassie to scream out in pain and fall to the ground. Nina would smile as Cassie fell, ready to be crowned the victor. Just as Nina lifted her hands in victory, however, Cassie used her little remaining strength to pick up her pickaxe and stab Nina in the side of the head with it, sounding Nina's cannon. As Cassie's victory was announced, Cassie collapsed to the ground unconscious. After the games, Cassie spent a grand total of 5 years in the hospital, being taken care of while in a medically induced coma. Once Cassie had finally woken up, she moved to District 8, ready to start a new life. In District 10, Cassie's life was toxic and intense. She just wanted to live a better life. In District 8, Cassie eventually met the love of her life, a surprisingly muscular young man named Samite Charles. Cassie and Samite would end up getting married 10 years after Cassie's victory at the age of 24. This pair would have 13 children together, none of which would compete in future games. The pair would also adopt a girl the year before their marriage, who would go on to win the games after their marriage. For the 220th Hunger Games, as this was the 29th quinquennial quell, President Belladonna Caliban made a live appearance on Capitol TV. After applause in Snow Square, President Caliban bowed and announced that in order to remind the districts that their deepest, darkest fears belong to the Capitol, the tributes this year will be faced up against their deepest, darkest fears in the arena. After last year's games, the Capitol was super excited for what this year's quell would bring. The quell victor this year was notably scared of an idea more than a physical thing. This victor was scared of coming out as lesbian to her friends and family. Here are the mentors for the 220th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a mall. There was no weather because it was inside. The main event was an earthquake. The games lasted for 3 days, and the notable mutts were shape-shifting mutts. This year's victor was 17-year-old Estrella Adams from District 5. Before the games, Estrella and her secret girlfriend Durrani made a deal that if one of them was reaped, the other would volunteer in their place. This deal was kept even after the quell announcement. So, when Durrani was reaped, Estrella immediately volunteered in her place, like stated in the deal. During training, Estrella got really close with her district partner and the pairs from Districts 3, 8, and 9. This group would agree to ally with each other in the arena, agreeing to let the younger tributes run away from the cornucopia while the older tributes ran in to grab materials. This meant that the girls from 3 and 9, along with Estrella's district partner, had to run away while the others stayed. When the gong sounded, this plan was immediately put into effect. Carbona from 3, Boris from 5, and Farina from 9 ran away from the cornucopia, while Consul from 3, Estrella, Kirtland from 8, Crispin from 8, and Drax from 9 ran into the cornucopia for resources. As the group ran in, they immediately heard screams surrounding them. These screams would be revealed to be due to this year's mutts. The shape-shifting mutts this year would shapeshift into a tribute sphere if they looked at the mutt for too long. As Estrella ran past Joffrey from 14, staring at a group of spiders and screaming, she quickly acknowledged the mutts and the fears of the tributes around her. Just then, she heard Consul screaming and a cannon sounding. Estrella immediately looked towards where Consul was and sees beetles crawling away from Consul's body. As Estrella stood in fear after losing one of her allies, Cato from 2 tackled her to the ground and lifted her sword above his head. Just then, Kirtland tackled Cato off of Estrella as Crispin helped Estrella up. Kirtland then told Crispin and Estrella to run as she began to fight Cato. As Estrella and Crispin met up with Drax and began running away from the cornucopia, the trio heard Kirtland's cannon as she was stabbed in the side of the neck by Cato. This cannon caused Estrella to burst into tears as the trio ran away from the cornucopia to find Carbona, Boris, and Farina. As Estrella, Crispin, and Drax found Carbona, Boris, and Farina, the trio of older tributes told the younger tributes what happened to Consul and Kirtland. When Carbona heard what happened to her older brother, she burst into tears, causing the other members of the alliance to pull her into a hug. Later that night, when the fallen were shown, the whole alliance went eerily silent as Consul and Kirtland's pictures were shown in the sky. That night, 6 pictures were shown in the fallen. The fact that so few people died on the first day surprised the alliance, but they snapped back into reality when they heard a scream and a cannon nearby. This cannon was revealed to belong to Joanne from 14, after a group of hawks attacked her while she was watching the fallen. The sight of Joanne's bleeding body scared Kareem from 15 when he saw it, but he kept his cool in order to not wake Joffrey and Emmeline from 15. As the night went on, the amount of cannons ramped up. The girls from Districts 1 and 2, along with the boy from 4, were attacked in the night by huge groups of bugs. Meanwhile, Cletus from 10 had a panic attack due to his fear of heights, and Kriya from 10 had a heart attack as she saw a clown in one of the shops. As these cannons went off, Crispin and Drax heard a sound in the bushes. Just then, the couriers pounced out of the bushes. The whole group screamed as Cato stabbed Carbona in the side of the neck, muttering how he had done that same thing to Kirtland. This made the other members of the alliance mad as they took their weapons out. Boris and Farina were instructed by the older tributes to find a hiding spot while the others took care of Cato and the 12s. The pair would do this without question, as Drax passes Estrella one of his swords. As the trio fought Cato, they heard a pair of screams and a pair of cannons following. These screams and cannons belonged to Boris and Farina as a clown found them and attacked them, killing them. This clown was actually revealed to be Derek from 6, who was sponsored the paints he used to paint himself like a clown. As the trio was distracted by the deaths of their allies, Cato ran at Drax and stabbed him in the side of the neck. After doing this, though, a scream was heard in the distance. This scream was revealed to be the real Kato as a group of dogs attacked him and killed him. Just then, the mutt morphed into a group of hissing cats. This caused Crispin to scream, and he dropped his sickle, starting to back away slowly from the mutt. Just then, the cats jumped onto Crispin and began scratching and biting at him, slowly biting and scratching him to death. As Estrella watched this, she started to cry. By the second night, Estrella had developed a completely new fear, the fear of being alone. The game makers used this against her by steering all the tributes and mutts away from her for the duration of the second day. The lack of interaction caused Estrella to cry for most of the day. On the dawn of the third day, it was down to the top 10. The top 10 consisted of Estrella from 5, Derek from 6, Ebony from 7, Dixie from 11, Jordan from 11, Elma from 12, Johnson from 12, Joffrey from 14, Emmeline from 15, and Kareem from 15. As Estrella started to wake up, she felt an intense shaking in the ground underneath her. She then began to hear things collapsing around her. As she looked around, she saw a huge crack forming in the wall just behind her. This caused her to get up and run as fast as she could towards the cornucopia. As she arrived at the cornucopia, she dived behind a box inside the cornucopia structure and got down low, shielding her head with her hands. As she stayed down, she heard battles starting behind her as Derek, Ebony, Dixie, and Jordan arrived at the cornucopia. As the battles continued, more people arrived, and Joffrey even jumped behind the box Estrella was behind. The pair would agree to truce whilst staying safe from the earthquake that was still occurring. As the ground slowly began to stop shaking, it was down to the top 5. The top 5 consisted of Estrella from 5, Derek from 6, Elma from 12, Johnson from 12, and Joffrey from 14. As Elma and Johnson began fighting Derek, Estrella and Joffrey decided to stay behind their box. As the fight between the two remaining careers and Derek continued, Estrella and Joffrey started to lose hope of winning. This loss of hope only got worse as Derek managed to kill both remaining careers, leaving just him, Estrella, and Joffrey. As the trio realized this, Estrella and Joffrey reluctantly got out of their hiding spot. As Derek saw Estrella and Joffrey, he laughed. Just then, Joffrey smiled and nodded at Estrella before running in. Derek promptly punched Joffrey in the face, knocking him unconscious. Derek then approached Estrella, who stood still, terrified. Estrella then started to fight Derek. At first, Estrella was getting hit hard until she managed to get a few good hits off on him. Just then, Derek stabbed Estrella in the stomach and pushed her backwards, causing her to fall onto the ground. As Estrella began to lose consciousness, Joffrey got back into the fight, punching Derek in the stomach. As Derek stabbed Joffrey in the stomach, a barely awake Estrella jumped onto Derek's back, snapping his neck with her bare hands. As Derek fell to the ground, Estrella fell right next to Joffrey. Joffrey would thank Estrella as the pair would reach over to each other and hold each other's hands, thinking they were both going to die. As Estrella waited to die, Joffrey told Estrella that he thought she was gorgeous before letting out a weak smile and dying. As Joffrey's cannon sounded, Estrella finally lost consciousness. After the games, Estrella was immediately taken to Flickerman Hospital. There, Estrella was treated for the wound to her stomach. While at the hospital, her family had visited her many times. There were many mixed feelings about Estrella's sexuality, which had come to public knowledge during the Quell. Some supported her, more notably her parents and 5 siblings. Meanwhile, her uncle and aunt didn't support it. As Estrella woke up from her medically induced coma 10 months after her victory, President Belladonna Caliban was there by her bed. Estrella and the president would talk and bond over the fact that they both had feared telling their friends and family about their sexuality. After 5 months of the pair talking, Estrella actually married Belladonna Caliban. Estrella and Belladonna would end up adopting 15 kids, 13 girls and 2 boys. These kids would become stylists and mayors in the future. Their youngest, Cressida, 9 when adopted, would go on to be the youngest stylist in the history of stylists when she became the District 14 stylist at the age of 10. Cressida would be the only straight child of Estrella and Belladonna, marrying the victor of the 229th Hunger Games, 8 years after being adopted herself. After last year's very interesting quell, the Capitol loved the new head game maker, Lev Thomas, and loved his ideas. This year, Districts 5 and 15 would be picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 11 and 14 would be picked to send in the extra male tributes. Here are all the mentors for the 221st Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in Japanese gardens. The weather was clear skies, the main event was tracker detonations, the games lasted for 5 days, and the notable nuts were koi fish. This year's victor was 15-year-old Lilica Creed from District 11. Before the games, Lilica got super close with the European group this year, composing of Paisley from 14, Donald from 14, Sterling from 14, Eloise from 15, Anne from 15, and Kristoff from 15. During training, Lilica talked the European tributes into letting her into the alliance. This would prove to be one of the best moves that either party could have made. When the tributes rose into the arena, most tributes were captivated by the beauty of the arena surrounding them. Meanwhile, Lilica, Paisley, Donald, Sterling, Eloise, Anne, and Kristoff weren't so easily distracted by the beauty of the arena. When the gong sounded, Lilica and her allies were some of the only tributes to run into the cornucopia with the careers. Meanwhile, most other tributes stayed still on their podiums, having been distracted by the beauty of the arena. As Lilica arrived at the cornucopia, she quickly grabbed a scythe and turned to see Achilles from 2 with a sword. Lilica clutched her scythe in her hand, ready to fight. Just then, Hilton from 1 tackled Achilles to the ground and stabbed him in the neck multiple times. Lilica then decided to run away from the cornucopia while the careers were distracted. As she ran, she looked behind her to see Gloriana from 2 tackling Hilton to the ground and stabbing him in the stomach multiple times, trying to avenge Achilles. Just then, Lux from 1 decapitated Gloriana with her knife. As Paisley, Donald, Sterling, Eloise, Anne, and Kristoff met up with Lilica, they all ran away from the cornucopia together as more cannons sounded. That night, at midnight, 13 cannons sounded. These 13 cannons belonged to Hilton from 1, Gloriana from 2, Achilles from 2, the boy from 3, all 3 tributes from 5, the boy from 6, the girl from 8, both tributes from 9, and both boys from 11. As the night continued, Lilica got close with Eloise. The Capitol would start to ship the pair together. The pretty 15-year-old from District 11 and the stunning 17-year-old from District 15 were amongst the favorite ships this year. So, when Lilica kissed Eloise, completely by accident, during the first night, the Capitol celebrated and cheered for this pair. On the dawn of the second day, Lilica woke up to see Eloise already awake, being the last person to take watch of the camp. Before the rest of the alliance woke up, Lilica sat next to Eloise, and the pair had a deep conversation. The exact words that were said were unknown to the Capitol, but the conversation ended in a kiss, which the pair referred to as a parting kiss. After the parting kiss, both girls still showed remnants of attraction towards each other, but unlike before, they didn't act on their feelings at all for the rest of the games. As the day continued, the group got to know each other more. Lilica would find out that Eloise, Anne, and Kristoff were all siblings, with Kristoff being the youngest. Just then, Santiago from 10 jumped out of a nearby bush and stabbed Kristoff in the heart, sounding his cannon. This caused Anne and Eloise to scream as Donald and Sterling grabbed their weapons. As the pair did this, they told Paisley and Lilica to take Anne and Eloise to a safer location. This pair would reluctantly do this, hearing multiple cannons behind them. That night, the portraits of Santiago from 10, the girl from 12, Donald from 14, Sterling from 14, and Kristoff from 15 were shown in the sky. When the portraits of Donald, Sterling, and Kristoff were shown, Paisley, Anne, Eloise, and Lilica cried for their lost allies, some taking it worse than others. On the dawn of the 5th day, it was down to the final 7 tributes. These 7 tributes were Lux from 1, Moana from 4, Marlin from 4, Honey from 7, Lupe from 10, Lilica from 11, and Miles from 12. As Lilica woke up, she heard an announcement over the loudspeaker of the arena. President Belladonna Caliban announced that if the remaining tributes don't get to the cornucopia in an hour, then their trackers will be detonated. As President Belladonna got off of the comms, Lilica immediately began running towards the cornucopia. When she got to the cornucopia, she was surprisingly the first to get to the cornucopia. Before the couriers could arrive, Lilica dived behind a box in the cornucopia. Before the couriers arrived, 2 cannons sounded. These cannons belonged to Moana and Marlin after the other couriers had tied them down and ran for the cornucopia on their own. As Lilica saw Lux, Honey, Lupe, and Miles break into the cornucopia clearing, she watched as Lux tackled Honey to the ground. As Lilica watched, Lux was about to bring her sword down into Honey's neck until Miles tackled Lux off of her. As Miles fought Lux, Lupe stabbed Honey in the neck and then tackled Miles off of Lux. The pair would then both get on top of Miles and smirked down at him. Lupe then kissed Lux before both of them stabbed Miles in the heart simultaneously. As Lilica saw this, she reluctantly stayed behind her box, hoping Lux and Lupe would think that Lilica had died. To her surprise, Lux and Lupe actually thought that Lilica had died. As the pair fought, Lilica looked around in the cornucopia structure, being hidden by boxes. As she looked around, Lilica found a throwing knife that the couriers had obviously not found before. As Lilica got back behind the box, she saw Lupe get the upper hand, snapping Lux's neck. As Lux's cannon sounded, Lupe stood up and voiced her confusion about the Capitol not announcing her victory. Just then, Lilica jumped up from behind her box, throwing the throwing knife directly into Lupe's heart. As Lupe's cannon sounded, Lilica fell to her knees, bursting into tears as her victory was announced. After the games, Lilica returned home where she would go on to be a drunkard like Haymitch had been before mentoring Katniss and Peeta. When Lilica was 19, she'd get arrested for starting a fight in a bar within the Capitol with future victor Gaia Buford. After that moment, Lilica would be in and out of jail multiple times due to fights and being overly intoxicated in public. After last year's games, the Capitals started to associate District 11 with more seductive victors. This year, the victor beat all the odds as they were one of the weaker tributes in the arena this year. This year, Districts 6 and 7 were picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 5 and 12 were picked to send in the extra male tributes. Here are all the mentors of the 222nd Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a coal mine. The weather was non-existent because it's underground. The main event was a mine collapse. The games lasted for 4 days, and the notable mutts were man-eating beetles. This year's victor was 17-year-old Ashmore Crowley from District 6. Before the games, Ashmore began to fall for one of his district partners, Nevada, aged 18. Meanwhile, Ashmore's little sister, Palmyra, aged 15, fell for the boy from District 9, Spade, aged 15, and Spade's district partner, Sephi, aged 16. Because of this, Spade and Sephi ended up forming an alliance with the Sixes. As the countdown before the gong began, Ashmore looked around to try to find his allies. As he looked around, he noticed that Spade was right next to him. As Ashmore noticed that Spade looked to be crying, so as soon as Spade looked over at Ashmore, Ashmore gave Spade a reassuring nod. Ashmore then looked around more, seeing Palmer from 7 to his right. On the opposite side of Palmer, 2 podiums away from Ashmore, was Sephi. Sephi also looked terrified, shaking and tearing up. Ashmore felt bad for the Nines, vowing to himself that he would do whatever it took to protect the Nines, more for his sister than for himself. As the gong sounded, Ashmore ran into the cornucopia, getting there surprisingly quick. Ashmore immediately grabbed a sword and turned around, stabbing the boy from 2 in the heart, sounding his cannon. This made the boy from 2 a favorite for victory, the first death of the 222nd Hunger Games. As Ashmore looked over to his right, he saw Palmer on top of Sephi, about to bring his axe down into Sephi's head. Before he could do this, however, Ashmore tackled Palmer off of Sephi, stabbing Palmer in the hand with his sword before stabbing Palmer in the neck with his sword, sounding his cannon. Sephi then thanked Ashmore before picking up a scythe that was dropped by the girl from 11, after being killed by Corey from 8 with a throwing knife. Ashmore then grabbed Sephi by the arm and ran away from the cornucopia, running to catch up with their allies. As Ashmore and Sephi reunited with Nevada, Palmyra, and Spade, 11 cannons sounded, marking the end of the bloodbath. These cannons belonged to the boy from 2, both tributes from 3, the girl from 5, Palmer from 7, the girl from 8, the girl from 11, both tributes from 14, and both tributes from 15. As Palmyra realized Sephi was alive, she ran over and hugged Sephi. Meanwhile, Nevada smiled and hugged Ashmore, glad he was okay as well. Ashmore and Nevada would then look over at Palmyra and Sephi, still hugging. Nevada would comment that Sephi and Palmyra looked adorable together. Meanwhile, Ashmore was stuck wishing that it was him and Nevada instead. That night, as Ashmore and Palmyra were on watch that night, they heard multiple cannons in the distance, being glad the cannons didn't sound closer. These cannons belonged to the girl from 1, the boy from 11, the girl from 12, the extra boy from 5, and the extra boy from 12, after they were all attacked by this year's mutt. Eventually, Palmyra told Ashmore that she was going to bed. Ashmore nodded, still being slightly jealous of Palmyra and Sephi's relationship. Palmyra just sighed and tried to hug Ashmore, but he pushed her away. Palmyra's eyes started to water, but she held back the tears before going over to where the nines were sleeping and laying down next to them in her sleeping bag. She felt something crawling in her sleeping bag, but she paid it no mind. Just then, at the dead of night, as Ashmore watched, beetles started to filter into the opening in the cave that they were camping in. Ashmore didn't think much of these beetles at first. All it took was Spade's cannon sounding for Ashmore to get up and try to wake the others up. As Palmyra and Nevada woke up, they opened their eyes and saw nothing. This was revealed to be because the beetles were crawling over their eyes. As soon as they realized this, the girls screamed, waking up Seffi. As this occurred, Ashmore tried to get the beetles off of the girls, but the beetles would start to crawl up his leg, biting at it. As Ashmore started to feel pain in his legs, he knew he couldn't save the girls. Ashmore apologized to the girls before running away, swatting the beetles off of his own skin. As Ashmore got to a relatively safe location, he broke down, curling into a ball and crying as he heard the cannons of his allies. All he could think of was the last thing he did to Palmyra, pushing her away when she tried to hug him. He felt terrible and just wanted the games to be over by now. Just then, Caitlin from 2 ran into the part of the cave that Ashmore was in. Instead of attacking, however, Caitlin showed immense levels of fear in her eyes. Ashmore immediately knew what she was scared of and asked her who the beetles had taken. Caitlin would reply that now the boy from 1 and both tributes from 4 were dead. As Caitlin said this, Ashmore realized that the games were down to the top 9. The top 9 consisted of Caitlin from 2, Atlin from 5, Ashmore from 6, Folia from 7, Lindsay from 7, Corey from 8, Linda from 10, Enrique from 10, and Levin from 12. Instead of attacking each other after this realization, Ashmore and Caitlin instead agreed that in order for either of them to win, they'd need each other. Over the next few days, only one cannon sounded. This cannon belonged to Levin, as he was eaten by beetles. On the dawn of the 4th day, there were still 8 tributes remaining. As Ashmore and Caitlin woke up, they noticed that the beetles were crawling past them, but not attacking them. Ashmore and Caitlin immediately found this odd, and they looked between each other with surprise. Just then, Ashmore heard a loud banging sound nearby. Just then, a small part of the cave in front of the pair collapsed. It was at this point that the pair knew what was going on. As Ashmore and Caitlin realized what was going on, they began to run towards where the cornucopia was. As Ashmore and Caitlin arrived at the cornucopia, they hid around the corner when they saw Atlin, Folia, Lindsay, and Corey fighting each other. As the pair waited for the fight to cool down, Linda and Enrique ran into the part of the cave that Ashmore and Caitlin were in and almost bumped into them. When Linda and Enrique saw Ashmore and Caitlin, both pairs of tributes readied their weapons. Linda and Enrique made the first move in this fight. Linda ran at Caitlin while Enrique ran at Ashmore. Caitlin took out her throwing knives and threw one towards Linda, but missed, and the knife dug itself into the wall of the cave. Meanwhile, Ashmore easily stabbed Enrique in the gut. Ashmore then looked over at Caitlin and Linda, now both unarmed and struggling on the ground. As Linda got on top of Caitlin and began to choke her out, Ashmore ran at Linda and tackled her off of Caitlin. As Linda and Ashmore began fighting, Caitlin saw Ashmore's sword still in the body of Enrique. Caitlin quickly ran over to his body and grabbed the sword before the hovercraft got Enrique. Caitlin then ran over to Linda and Ashmore, stabbing Linda in the back of the head with the sword. As Caitlin helped Ashmore to his feet, the pair ended up inches apart. The pair looked each other in the eye for a moment before Ashmore smiled and thanked Caitlin for helping him out, to which Caitlin stated that it was the least she could do for him, considering he helped her out too. As this was occurring, the fight between Atlin, Folia, Lindsay, and Corey was ending as well. To the surprise of everyone in the capital, Corey came out of the fight victorious. This meant that it was down to the top 3, Caitlin from 2, Ashmore from 6, and Corey from 8. As Caitlin and Ashmore realized this, they nodded at each other before stepping out into the cornucopia area. Corey laughed as the pair emerged before calling Ashmore a traitor to the Outliers, to which Ashmore replied that Corey was technically also a traitor to the Outliers for killing the girl from 11 and the boy from 5. This angered Corey and he ran at Ashmore, but Caitlin stepped in between the pair and got stabbed in the heart by Corey. As Caitlin spat up blood, she turned to Ashmore and told him to win before falling to the ground as her cannon sounded. As Ashmore watched Caitlin collapse, he grabbed his sword and ran at Corey. As the pair of boys collided, Ashmore swung his sword, hitting Corey in the stomach. Corey cursed under his breath, holding his stomach in pain. As Ashmore then swung his sword again, decapitating Corey, sounding his cannon. As Corey fell, Ashmore took a deep breath and walked over to Caitlin's body. Ashmore then knelt down next to Caitlin and bowed his head. For a moment, all was silent within Panem. Many citizens awaited Ashmore's next move, while others were touched by the moment. As Ashmore's victory was announced, Ashmore stood up, glared into a nearby camera. He then did a 3-finger salute like what had been done during the Second Rebellion during the 74th and 75th Hunger Games. After the games, Ashmore was taken to a prison within the capital. He was held there until riots in the outer districts calmed down. This was less about keeping Ashmore safe and more about the fact that Ashmore caused these riots with that 3-finger salute. After 10 months of being held in prison, Ashmore was finally released, for good behavior, if you could believe it. After his release, Ashmore would move to District 2, where he made a memorial for Caitlin outside of his Victor's village house. Ashmore would go on to teach sword fighting technique in the Dalton Elite Training Academy, fully embracing the career lifestyle. He was glad he left the trailer park he lived in back in District 6, even though he had lost everyone. 2 years after his victory, Ashmore met a girl through the Dalton Elite. This girl's name was Nicolette Dalton, a descendant of the Ennius Dalton, victor of the 76 Hunger Games. Ashmore and Nicolette would become very close friends, and on Ashmore's 21st birthday, he drank a lot of liquid courage and ended up asking Nicolette out on a date. Nicolette would accept this, and the pair would end up getting married the next year. Ashmore and Nicolette would end up having 20 kids together, 18 girls and 2 boys. Both of the boys and 8 of the girls would end up competing in back-to-back games, getting varying placements, but none of them winning. After last year's games, the capital wanted more interesting victors like Lilica and Ashmore. This year, the victor would be the youngest tribute this year, having turned 13 a couple days before the reapings of the games. This year, Districts 1 and 9 were picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 10 and 14 were picked to send in the extra male tributes. These are the mentors for the 223rd Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in a pinewood forest. The weather was light rain. The main event was a tree collapse. The games lasted for 3 days, and the notable mutts were playful wolves. This year's victor was 13-year-old Locust Bartley from District 7. Before the games, Locust tried to join the careers, but they wouldn't accept him due to his young age. Locust would end up allying with the tributes from Districts 3, 5, 14, and 15. As the gong sounded, Locust ran into the cornucopia with his allies and the careers. Because of his young age, fast build, and training, Locust was the first tribute to arrive at the cornucopia. He grabbed an axe and immediately turned around, chopping the boy from 10's head off with it. Locust then picked up a bag of oranges and ran away from the cornucopia with his allies, leaving the careers speechless about the fact that their strongest member was killed by a 13-year-old. After the bloodbath, only 2 cannons sounded to mark the end of the bloodbath. These 2 cannons belonged to the girl from 4 and the boy from 10, both having been careers and favorites for victory. This was a record low for the amount of bloodbath kills. As Locust heard the 2 cannons, he was surprised that so few tributes died, much like the rest of his allies. They all began to ask themselves and each other what the capital might have up their sleeves to make the games more interesting. Just then, Locust heard a scream nearby, followed by a cannon. This cannon belonged to the boy from 8 after the remaining careers found him and killed him, after he had killed the girl from 4 in the bloodbath. As Locust was waiting for some sort of event to occur, USB from 3 and Zinc from 3 screamed nearby. As Locust and his other allies rushed over, they saw wolves grouping under a tree that USB and Zinc were stuck in. As the others came into the clearing, USB and Zinc called out for Nysa from 5 and Meteor from 5 to do something, to which the 5s asked the 3s what they wanted them to do. As the conversation was occurring, Locust and Nessa from 14 noticed something about the wolves. Locust then told USB and Zinc to be very careful and to come down from the tree slowly. USB yelled to Locust, asking if he wanted them to die, but Zinc decided to try it, as he too noticed that the wolves weren't growling at them, they were just playing. As Zinc got close to the bottom of the tree, he got a stick and smiled down at the wolves before saying, "Fetch," and throwing the stick. This caused the wolves to run off and go to fetch the stick. As USB and Zinc got to the bottom of the tree, USB asked Zinc why he didn't do that fetch thing earlier, causing Locust, Nessa, Nysa, Meteor, and even Zinc himself to laugh. At midnight, only 4 cannons went off during the Fallen. These cannons belonged to the girls from 4 and 9 and the boys from 8 and 10. This lack of death on the first day made all the tributes in the arena almost certain that an arena event was going to happen the next day. A few hours later, at 5 in the morning, as Locust and his allies were talking about what the arena event could possibly be, Emmanuel from 15 heard something nearby. Just then, a tree at the edge of their camp collapsed, crushing Noel from 15 under it. This caused the whole alliance to scatter, running in different directions. This event would end up killing 12 tributes. These tributes were the boys from 1, 2, and 4, all 4 extra tributes, and the girls from 2, 7, 8, 14, and 15. A few hours later, the trees stopped collapsing, and Locust and Daniel from 14 realized they were separated from the rest of the alliance. Meanwhile, Emmanuel was all alone, and the other surviving members of the alliance were all together. Eventually, the group would reunite that night, but without Nessa and Noel, the casual joking and banter was non-existent. Instead, most of the group stayed silent, minus the occasional howl of a nearby wolf and the wolf's pack. On the dawn of the third day, it was down to the top 10. The top 10 consisted of Lucilla from 1, USB from 3, Zinc from 3, Nysa from 5, Meteor from 5, Tesla from 6, Denmark from 6, Locust from 7, Daniel from 14, and Emmanuel from 15. When this was realized by the only large alliance left, Locust and Daniel agreed that the group had to break up. When the group split, most went with their district partners, but Locust, Daniel, and Emmanuel didn't have this option. Instead, the trio would stick together with each other. As the day went on, 5 cannons sounded. These 5 cannons belonged to Lucilla, USB, Zinc, Nysa, and Meteor. All of these kills were perpetrated by the menaces from 6. This is when head game maker Kimberly Hightower made an announcement. This announcement was that any tribute who wasn't seen at the cornucopia within an hour would have their tracker detonated. This announcement freaked out the boys because they were the furthest from the cornucopia, being right at the boundary. This caused the boys to immediately begin running to the cornucopia, trying to get there within the time limit. When Locust, Emmanuel, and Daniel got to the cornucopia, they got there just in time to see Tesla decapitating Denmark with a sword left behind at the cornucopia by the failed careers this year. As the trio stepped out into the cornucopia clearing, it was immediately evident that Tesla regretted killing her district partner, who could have helped her out with killing the boys. Locust ran in at first, taking his axe out and wielding it. As Locust ran at Tesla with impressive speed, Tesla actually screamed before his scream was cut off by Locust chopping her head off with the axe. He then turned to Daniel and Emmanuel, a surprisingly bloodthirsty look on his face. Locust then ran at Daniel, the only other armed member of the trio. Daniel immediately prepared his sword, ready to fight Locust. As Locust neared him, Daniel swung first, stabbing Locust in the side. As Locust let out a soft whimper, Daniel raised his sword, ready to bring it down on Locust. Locust then pulled an ace out of his sleeve. As Daniel brought his sword down, Locust smirked and caught it, swinging his axe into the side of Daniel's neck, sounding his cannon. Locust then stood up, looking at the now terrified Emmanuel, his final opponent. He walked over to Emmanuel and put his hand on Emmanuel's shoulder. He then apologized to Emmanuel, claiming that he was a nice change of pace from the insane assholes in 7. This comment caused Emmanuel to snap, saying, "like you," in his thick French accent. Locust would snap at this, plunging his axe into the side of Emmanuel's neck multiple times until his head was chopped clean off. After the games, Locust was nicknamed the Executioner for his way of killing all his kills by decapitation. The months after Locust's victory were crucial. He was kept in a psych ward, causing his victory tour and interview to be cancelled. While he was in the psych ward, he notably killed one of his doctors on the day he was supposed to originally be released. This caused him to be held in the psych ward for a few more months. When he was finally released, Locust had just turned 21, having been held in the psych ward for 8 years. He'd go on to be a successful mentor, mentoring most District 7 tributes to at least the top 10. He'd eventually mentor a victor that would take his place as a male mentor of the district, though. Locust would stay in the capital after being released, with even the people in the career districts being scared of him, even his home district not wanting him back. Eventually, Locust would meet Livia Crane, a gorgeous young woman with curly brunette hair. Eventually, Locust would ask Livia out on a date. Livia would initially reject him, but the more he tried, the more he grew on Livia. Livia would eventually say yes to going out with Locust. Locust and Livia would end up getting married after Locust turned 25. Livia and Locust would end up having 8 kids together, 7 girls and a boy. Although the pair did try to have one more when they were 35, the baby ended up being a miscarriage, though, causing Locust to tip back over the edge of insanity. On the night of September 11th, when he had turned 50, Locust would murder Livia and 5 out of his 8 kids. The news would end in the capital needing to kill one of their favorite victors in the 3rd century, Locust the Executioner Bartley. After last year's games, Locust was definitely one of the most loved victors in the first 25 years of the 3rd century. This year, Districts 1 and 7 were picked to send in the extra female tributes, and Districts 1 and 11 were picked to send in the extra male tributes. Here are the mentors for the 224th games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in fruit orchards. The weather was clear skies. The main event was a tornado. The games lasted for 3 days, and the notable nuts were locusts. This year's victor was 18-year-old Gaia Beaufort from District 2. Before the games, Gaia used her amazing looks to her advantage, seducing boys and girls into protecting her in the arena. These tributes were the 18-year-old boy from District 1, Beckham Angstrom, the 17-year-old girl from 4, Nori Smink, the 16-year-old boy from 4, Anchor Chigwell, the 18-year-old boy from 5, Hector Von Bitra, the 17-year-old boy from 6, Houston McFay, the 16-year-old girl from 7, Lilac Seedle, the 18-year-old girl from 8, Magneta Sands, the 17-year-old girl from 10, Merida Onassis, the 16-year-old girl from 11, Lilith Carter, and the 16-year-old girl from 12, Rhea Alshire. When the gong sounded, Gaia ran into the cornucopia and grabbed a sword, immediately turning to William from 14 and stabbing him in the throat. As Gaia turned to find another tribute, Fortunato from 1 ran at her from behind. Before she could even realize someone was approaching, however, Lilac runs at Fortunato and chops his head off with her axe. Just then, Megan from 3 runs at Gaia and actually manages to hit her in the leg with a throwing knife. As Gaia fell to her knees, Beckham dived over Gaia and stabbed Megan in the heart. After grabbing some medical supplies, she gives the others a signal that they had all talked about in order to let them know she was running. With that, Gaia and her protectors ran away from the cornucopia. After the bloodbath, 15 cannons sounded to mark the end. These 15 cannons belonged to Megan from 3, the girl from 5, the girl from 6, the boy from 7, the boy from 8, the boy from 10, the boy from 11, the boy from 12, both tributes from 14, both tributes from 15, both extra tributes from 1, and the extra boy from 11. Most of these kills were done by Gaia's protectors, committing to what they had talked about during training. During the first night, Gaia was on watch with Rhea and Merida. As the trio stayed awake, they heard a scream and a cannon in the distance. This cannon belonged to the girl from 1 after she was found by the remaining careers and killed. This left just Maximilian from 2 and Ivy from 7 in the career alliance. On the dawn of the second day, Gaia and the protectors stayed at camp all day, hearing cannons going off all around them. This scared the younger members of the alliance, and they clinged to Gaia or their district partner. At midnight, during the second night, Gaia and Beckham were on watch as the fallen tributes were shown in the sky. The portraits shown in the sky on this night belonged to the girl from 1 and both tributes from 9. Just then, another cannon was heard nearby. This cannon was revealed to be Hector after Maximilian and Ivy had snuck into the camp of Gaia and the Protectors. This realization caused Beckham and Gaia to turn around, just in time to see Maximilian decapitating Houston and Ivy slicing the neck of Magneto open. This caused Beckham and Gaia to run at the pair. As Beckham and Gaia ran at Maximilian and Ivy, Ivy ran away, leaving just Maximilian. The boy from Gaia's home district would be an easy kill for Beckham and Gaia, but before they could make it over to him, Maximilian stabbed Lilith in the stomach, sounding her cannon. As Beckham and Gaia got to Maximilian, they let him have it, stabbing him 28 times each in various parts of his body that weren't fatal. It was eventually Gaia who dealt the killing blow with her 28th stab, stabbing Maximilian in the heart. This left the top 9 after midnight on the second night. The top 9 consisted of Beckham from 1, Gaia from 2, Amazon from 3, Nori from 4, Anchor from 4, Lilac from 7, Ivy from 7, Merida from 10, and Rhea from 12. At this point, Gaia knew she had to kill the people who had been protecting her since the beginning, but she didn't know how she would do it. Just then, Gaia and Becca heard something in the distance. This sound was loud enough to wake up Nori, Anchor, Lilac, Merida, and Rhea. This group immediately asked Beckham and Gaia what happened to Hector, Houston, Magneta, and Lilith, to which Beckham and Gaia told the group the truth about what happened while the group was asleep. Just then, the group was brought back to reality when the wind started to whip around them and a crazy downpour of rain around them. Just then, they saw the huge funnel of a tornado in the distance. The group was sure that this was the event to force them back to the cornucopia, and so the group ran. As the group ran, Nori tripped over a pair of shoes left in Amazon's stead. The other protectors looked back at Nori just in time to see the tornado burst into the clearing. This caused the group to run away, causing Nori to curse them out and call them traitors before being picked up by the tornado. As the group continued on, the tornado was gaining ground on them. Gaia, Beckham, and Rhea had noticed that when the tornado picked up Nori, it had slowed down. So, as they looked behind them, they noticed Merida was falling behind. This caused Gaia to run back and push Merida to the ground before running back to meet Beckham and Rhea. As Merida's cannon sounded, Lilac and Anchor paused to look back where Merida had been. When they didn't see her behind them, they tried to turn back towards Beckham, Gaia, and Rhea, but it was too late, and the pair were also picked up by the tornado. This brought the games down to the top 5. The top 5 consisted of Beckham from 1, Gaia from 2, Amazon from 3, Ivy from 7, and Rhea from 12. As Beckham, Gaia, and Rhea got to the cornucopia, they got there just in time to see Ivy stabbing Amazon in the neck, sounding his cannon. As the trio saw this, they ran out into the cornucopia clearing. As Ivy laughed at the dead body of Amazon, she failed to notice Beckham, Gaia, and Rhea running at her. As Beckham, Gaia, and Rhea got to Ivy, she had noticed the trio, but it was too late. Beckham, Gaia, and Rhea tackled Ivy to the ground and stabbed her 28 times each, the killing blow being dealt by Gaia with her 28th stab. Now it was down to the top 3. The top 3 consists of Beckham from 1, Gaia from 2, and Rhea from 12. The trio looked between each other with varying levels of regret, not wanting to kill each other, or so it was thought. As Beckham and Rhea were sufficiently distracted, Gaia walked over to Beckham and kissed him before stabbing him in the stomach, sounding his cannon. This caused Rhea to scream, knowing exactly what happened. As Gaia looked over at Rhea, she smirked. She then ran at Rhea and tackled her to the ground. Gaia smirked down at Rhea, pinning her down. Rhea looked utterly terrified of Gaia. Rhea would start crying, not wanting to die. As Gaia smirked, thinking about how to kill Rhea, an idea hit her, and she stabbed Rhea in the privates, causing Rhea to scream out in pain and cry harder. Gaia then smirked and left her there, screaming and suffering until her cannon sounded, making Gaia the victor of the 224th Hunger Games. After the games, Gaia went back to District 2, working as a stripper in one of the district's illegal strip clubs. She also went on to teach sword play in the Dalton Elite Training Academy. Through her training, she met a girl named Persephone Dalton. Persephone and Gaia would end up dating after Persephone turned 18 during the 230th Hunger Games. The pair would end up being considered the cutest couple in the history of District 2. Persephone and Gaia would end up adopting two different sets of triplets. One set of triplets composing of all males, Pegasus, Perseus, and Paulus, while meanwhile the other set of triplets is composed of two girls and a boy, Sabine, Sabina, and Saturno. Pegasus, Perseus, and Paulus would end up being the last killed tributes in back-to-back games. Meanwhile, Sabine, Sabina, and Saturno would all grow to be trainers in the Dalton Elite, or stylists for District 2. For the 225th Hunger Games, as this was the 30th quinquennial quell, President Belladonna Caliban made a live appearance on Capitol TV. After applause in Snow Square, President Caliban bowed and announced that in order to remind the districts of the importance of being proud of their ancestry, this year's tributes will be reaped from gay couples and their boyfriends must join them. Basically, a little bit more about this because I didn't write it in, but just wanted to explain it. It's all boys here. All of them are boys, but in like gay couples and lesbian couples, there's always the masculine presenting type of person, and then the feminine presenting type of person. That's what the M and the F stand for after the district numbers. When you see that after the district numbers, just know the F stands for feminine, not female, and the M stands for masculine, not male. There you go. Now that we have that, let's continue. After last year's games, the Capitol was definitely excited for this year's quell. This year's victor was the stepchild of a beloved District 11 victor, Agapa Selkova, victor of the 198th Hunger Games. Here are the mentors for the 225th Hunger Games. Pause and read at your own discretion. This year's games took place in the Four Seasons. The weather was clear skies in the summer sector, downpour of rain in the spring sector, heavy snow in the winter sector, and light rain in the autumn sector. The main event were different events in each sector. The games lasted for 4 days, and the notable mutts were different mutts in each sector. This year's victor was 18-year-old Jacob Gardner from District 11. Before the games, Jacob and his boyfriend Bertram were immediately scared before the reapings even began, since both Jacob and Bertram had heightened chances of being picked due to their excessive tesserae purchases. Surprisingly, even though two outlier districts came before District 11, Jacob and Bertram would be the first pair to cry when they got reaped, due to their relative newness to their relationship. During training, Jacob and Bertram immediately had problems with this year's career alliance. The only member of the alliance to not show aggression towards the pair was Rayo from 12, who was the twin brother of Rhea from last year. As the tributes were lifted into the arena, the tributes were immediately caught off guard when the cornucopia was placed under a massive tree that embodied attributes of a tree in each of the 4 seasons. One corner of the tree had colorful leaves, another had no leaves, another had vibrant green leaves, and the other had leaves that looked to just be growing back after a harsh winter. Off to each side of the tree were 4 different sectors, each sector being dedicated to a different season. A lot of Jacob's allies were caught off guard by the beauty of the arena, but Jacob just stared forward at the cornucopia, preparing to run in and grab whatever he needed to survive. When the gong sounded, Jacob ran into the cornucopia with the careers and the smart tributes from 3 and 5. As Jacob grabbed a scythe and turned around, he immediately saw the careers turning on Remedio from 12, while Rayo watched in dismay before running at the careers, vengeance in his eyes. As Jacob watched this, he heard Bertram screaming for him. As Jacob turned to Bertram, he turned just in time to see Bertram being decapitated by the femme gay from 1. Adam, age 17. This angered Jacob, and he ran at Adam, scythe at the ready. This made Adam laugh, and he prepared his sword again. But as Jacob approached faster and faster, Adam actually started to get scared of the boy. As Jacob got closer to Adam, he swung his scythe through the air, hitting Adam in the gut. As Adam screamed out in pain and yelled for his boyfriend, Carter, aged 18, Carter ran at Jacob, vaulting over a podium, stabbing a knife into Jacob's back. As Jacob fell to his knees, and the ones laughed at him, Rayo, who had just finished killing Julius from 2, vaulted over a podium and stabbed Carter in the heart before finishing off Adam. Rayo then helped Jacob up off the ground, and the pair of boys ran away from the cornucopia together. As the boys ran into the summer sector, 10 cannons sounded, marking the end of the bloodbath. These 10 cannons belonged to Adam from 1, Carter from 1, Julius from 2, the Femme from 3, the Mask from 5, Bertram from 11, Remedio from 12, both tributes from 14, and the Mask from 15. When the boys got far enough away, Rayo helped Jacob to a nearby tree, leaning him against it as he began to treat the wound on Jacob's back. Jacob would grimace as he felt the cold of the alcohol-soaked rag touch his wound, but he didn't fuss about it, knowing that Rayo was just trying to take care of him. After a few minutes of silence between the two, Rayo finally breaks the silence, claiming that the games were unfair. Jacob seemed surprised at first, commenting on the fact that Rayo was from a career district, to which Rayo replied that just because they get access to training doesn't mean that they have any less of a chance of dying. Both boys went silent for a moment again before Rayo broke the silence again, saying he was sorry for the death of Bertram. Jacob stared forward for a moment, not knowing what to say, before stating that he was sorry for the death of Remedio. Both boys then went silent again, staring up at the sky of the summer sector. Once again, the silence was broken. This time, the silence was broken by Jacob, stating that he hopes his allies are all right out there. Rayo then replies that he had completely forgotten about the 8s and the 9s. This would make Jacob chuckle, sarcastically asking Rayo, "What's new with you careers forgetting about us poor old outliers?" This comment made Rayo playfully roll his eyes. After this, the pair actually managed to get along pretty well. At midnight that night, 14 cannons sounded as the portraits of the fallen were shown. These portraits and cannons belonged to Adam from 1, Carter from 1, the Femme from 2, Julius from 2, Both tributes from 3, the Mask from 5, the Femme from 8, the Femme from 9, Bertram from 11, Remedio from 12, both tributes from 14, and the Mask from 15. As Jacob and Rayo saw the portraits of the Femmes from 8 and 9, the pair said that they hate those damn careers in unison. At that point, both boys were feeling extremely fatigued, and they both fell asleep. During the second day, Jacob and Rayo would explore the arena, roaming into the light rain of the autumn sector. As they got into this sector, Rayo noticed Jacob shivering as the cold rain hit his skin. Rayo would give Jacob his jacket, saying that Jacob looked like he had more use for it than he did. Jacob would smile and gratefully accept the jacket, putting it on quickly. Rayo would chuckle and state that Jacob also looked better in the jacket than he did, which made Jacob chuckle too. As the boys continued exploring, they started feeling the rain hitting them harder. As a huge chunk of hail landed in front of the boys, they noticed what was happening and began to run through the autumn sector, ducking under a tree for safety. Both boys were now shivering out of fear as they watched the hail pummel down onto the ground. As the hailstorm began to calm down later on in the day, Jacob and Rayo were apprehensive to step out of the relative safety of the tree until they saw a pair of people in the distance. As Jacob and Rayo got closer to the other pair, they saw it was Alexander from 8 and Ryland from 9. As Alexander and Ryland saw Jacob, they ran over to him and hugged him, glad he was okay. But then the pair saw Rayo. Fear was etched all over their faces. Jacob had to reassure the pair multiple times that Rayo was a friend before the pair accepted him. Just then, the group heard a cannon coming from the winter sector. Jacob and Rayo looked between each other, wanting to explore the winter sector to find out what could have happened to whoever just died. As the cannon was revealed to belong to Lewis from 6, who had died to the event in that sector. As Alexander and Ryland realized who the cannon could have belonged to whom they had run into earlier that day, they couldn't help but tear up. Just then, 2 cannons sounded from the summer sector. These 2 cannons belonged to Blister from 7 and Rust from 7, after they had died to the event in the summer sector. At midnight, Alexander, Ryland, Jacob, and Rayo all lie awake at the border of the autumn and winter sectors, as the fallen tributes were shown in the sky. As this occurred, Alexander and Ryland went silent as they saw the portrait of Lewis, feeling bad for Orlando from 6. Meanwhile, Rayo did the math and realized that there were only 11 tributes left, including them, a point he made sure to relay to Alexander, Ryland, and Jacob. The next day, not much happened. All that really happened was tributes moving from sector to sector, although there was one kill made on day 3 by the careers. This kill was Soul from 5, after the careers had found and killed him. On the dawn of the 4th day, and final day, Alexander, Ryland, Jacob, and Rayo roamed from the winter sector to the spring sector. The downpour of rain soaked all 4 boys, but they stuck together until they heard something. As they heard trees collapsing nearby, they also began to feel the ground shake. Ryland then screamed out, "It's an earthquake," causing all the boys to run towards the cornucopia. As the boys ran, Finch from 4 and Coral from 4 ran at the group and tackled Alexander and Ryland to the ground. As Jacob and Rayo turned back to try to help them, the earthquake's path of destruction was getting closer, and Alexander and Ryland begged the boys to run on without them. Jacob and Rhea would eventually reluctantly do this, leaving Finch, Coral, Alexander, and Ryland to be taken by the earthquake. As Jacob and Rhea continued to run, they heard more cannons going off around them. Orlando from 6 being taken by the massive tsunami in the summer sector, Hex from 10 being taken by the avalanche in the winter sector, and Jacques from 15 being taken by the hailstorm in the autumn sector. This just left Buck from 10, Jacob from 11, and Rhea from 12 by the time Jacob and Rhea got to the cornucopia. When they got there, they saw Buck already waiting for them. Buck chuckled at the pair of boys, soaked and shivering. Buck then ran at the boys, thinking both of them would be easy kills. This was until Rhea dove in front of Buck's blade, saving Jacob. As Rhea looked back at Jacob, he told Jacob to win this for him before his cannon sounded. This angered Jacob, and he ran at Buck, scythe at the ready. As he got closer to Buck, Jacob swung his scythe through the air, cutting Buck's leg clean off. As Buck yelled out in pain and fell to his knees, Jacob stood over him with a smirk, stating that this was for Rhea, before stabbing Buck in the heart with his scythe, making Jacob the victor of the 225th Hunger Games. After the games, Jacob returned home where he reunited with his family, including past victor Agapa Selkova Gardner. After losing both Bertram and Rhea, though, Jacob was a shell of his former self. He ended up delving into a life of alcoholism and drug addiction. He wouldn't go on to date anyone after Bertram, although he did adopt one child, Jaden, 15 when she was adopted by a 40-year-old Jacob Gardner. Jaden wouldn't go on to compete in any future games, living a life of solitude and peace. She would eventually get a girlfriend, and the pair would date for a few months before getting married. Jaden and her girlfriend would adopt 15 kids together, keeping the Gardner family legacy alive. So yeah, guys, that is the end of the 201st through 225th Hunger Games. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, then slap that like button. And as always, stay awesome. Bye.